Today, we're going to talk about a book that didn't just change science, it completely rewrote the story of life itself. We're talking about Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species, a book that did way more than just explain biology. It fundamentally changed how we see ourselves and our place in the universe. To really get it, you've got to picture what the world was like before Darwin. Imagine looking around and seeing every single creature, from the tiniest bug to the biggest whale, as a perfectly crafted, separate piece in some kind of grand divine puzzle. The sheer variety was just mind-boggling, but the big question was, why? That was life's greatest mystery. And then, bam, 1859. This book drops. And it didn't just offer an explanation, it offered a radical, evidence-packed idea that would basically tear down centuries of belief and build the very foundation of modern biology. But to really understand just how revolutionary Darwin's idea was, we've got to step back and look at the world he was pushing against. A world of seemingly fixed, unchanging species. Okay, so the main idea, the scientific consensus at the time, was that species were fixed, period. They were created just as they are, they don't change, and they each have their place in a grand design. This wasn't just a religious thing, it was baked into the science of the day, a field called natural theology. It's like they thought a bird's wing was so perfectly designed for flight, it had to be proof of a divine designer. So any talk about species changing, well, that was just crazy talk. Fringe science, and even a little dangerous. But all of that was about to be challenged, thanks to one young naturalist on a 5-year sea voyage that would give him the clues he needed to solve the puzzle. And here he is, the man himself, Charles Darwin. You know, back in 1831, he wasn't some radical thinker. Not at all. He was a young guy just out of Cambridge, actually planning to join the clergy, who lucked into a spot on the survey ship HMS Beagle. He thought he was just going to collect some cool specimens and see the world. He had no clue he was about to collect the very evidence that would turn the world on its head. So as the Beagle sailed around the globe, Darwin was just soaking it all in, a super sharp observer. In South America, he finds these huge fossils of extinct creatures that looked uncannily like the little armadillos running around right there. Huh. A strange coincidence. Then he gets to the Galapagos and he notices these little differences in the birds. The mockingbirds on one island looked a bit different from the ones on the next, but the real bombshell, the uh-oh moment, came when he got back to England. An expert bird specialist confirmed his suspicions. These weren't just varieties, they were totally distinct species, each one unique to its own little island. And this is the kind of question that must have just kept him up at night. The old way of thinking just wasn't cutting it anymore. I mean, if everything was specially created for its location, why would the extinct animals from South America look so much like the living animals from South America? Why not like animals from, say, Africa, where the climate is similar? Something else had to be going on. It hinted at a deep connection, a relationship through time. So he gets back to England, but he doesn't just run out and publish this bombshell idea. No way. He knew how explosive it was. Instead, he goes quiet. And for the next 20 years, he starts building his case, piece by painstaking piece. For the next 2 decades, Darwin basically lived a double life. To the public, he was this respected scientist. But in private, he was filling notebook after notebook with his secret theory. I mean, this guy did an 8-year deep dive on barnacles. He was writing letters to experts all over the globe, just gathering facts, any fact, from every little corner of natural history. So to get a handle on how selection could work in the wild, Darwin looked at something very familiar: animal breeding. He got totally obsessed with pigeons, and you can see why. He saw how breeders could start with one basic type of pigeon and, just by picking and choosing tiny variations over generations, create this incredible variety of birds. And it hit him. If humans can do this in just a few hundred years, imagine what nature, with its immense power, could do over millions of years. Darwin had the idea of selection, but he was missing the engine. What was driving it in nature? And the final piece of the puzzle, you won't believe it, didn't come from biology at all. It came from an essay on economics by Thomas Malthus, who argued that human populations will always grow faster than their food supply, leading to an inevitable struggle for existence. And reading that, it all clicked into place. Darwin realized this struggle for existence wasn't just about people, it applied to every living thing. And that led him to his central theory, natural selection. It's an idea that's so beautiful in its simplicity, but incredibly powerful. The logic is just so elegant when you break it down. First, way more offspring are born than can ever survive. It's just a fact of nature. Second, within any group of animals or plants, there's variation, right? No two are identical, and those differences can be passed down. Third, because there are too many mouths to feed and not enough resources, there's a constant struggle. And fourth, this is the kicker, any individual that happens to have a trait that gives it a tiny little edge in that struggle is more likely to survive, have kids, and pass that winning trait on. Over millions of years, that process creates entirely new species. In this simple sketch, this shows you the truly mind-blowing implication of it all. This is from one of his private notebooks way back in 1837. He draws this little branching diagram, the first tree of life, and just writes, "I think above it." Wow. In that one little sketch, he's realizing that all life is connected. Everything, you, me, the birds outside, the dinosaurs, we're all part of one gigantic branching family tree, all coming from a common ancestor. So 20 years he's been working on this, refining his big book on the subject. He's taking his time. But then a letter shows up from halfway across the planet, and suddenly it's a race against time. So in June of 1858, Darwin gets this package. It's from a young naturalist, Alfred Russel Wallace, who's out in Indonesia. And as Darwin reads it, his heart must have just sunk. Wallace had come up with the exact same theory of evolution by natural selection, completely independently. Darwin was crushed. He writes to his friend, basically saying, all my originality, it's all going to be smashed. But his friends, these influential scientists, Lyell and Hooker, they stepped in. They came up with a pretty fair solution. They presented Wallace's paper and some of Darwin's own unpublished notes together at a scientific meeting. And, the presentation itself didn't make huge waves that day, but it was a clear sign that this idea was in the air. More importantly for Darwin, it lit a fire under him. He knew he had to publish, and he had to do it now. So he ditches the plan for his huge multi-volume book and just starts writing like a madman to get out what he called an abstract of his theory. And that abstract became one of the most important books ever written on the origin of species. And the reaction? It was immediate. The entire first run, 1,250 copies, sold out to booksellers on day one. Gone. People were clearly desperate for an answer to this mystery of mysteries, and Darwin was about to give it to them. The book itself is just a masterclass in scientific argument. Darwin piles on mountains of evidence for what he called descent with modification, and he presents natural selection as the main driver of it all. And believe it or not, this is the only picture in the whole book, this one diagram showing his idea of how life branches out and changes over these vast stretches of time. The reaction was, well, explosive is an understatement. It kicked off one of the biggest debates in history. You had scientists passionately defending it, showing the clear anatomical links between apes and humans. But in the public sphere, it got ugly pretty fast. The idea was often twisted into a joke, with caricatures of Darwin himself as an ape. What's so brilliant about how Darwin handled this is that he knew the human part would be the most controversial. So in the whole book, all 500 pages of it, he says this one single, incredibly cautious sentence about us. That's it. He basically laid out the entire framework and let his readers connect the final, most shocking dot for themselves. Genius. But for Darwin, this view of life wasn't bleak or random at all. He saw it as full of grandeur and awe. And he ends the book with this beautiful passage, describing a tangled bank of plants and animals, and reflecting on how all this incredible complexity could have arisen from such simple laws. He gave us a totally new creation story, not one of a finished product, but one of endless, dynamic, and beautiful evolution.